a world where nuclear war has begun, vampires fought back in super real 3D.
Quick little one-off mention of a fun-looking new camera, the Canon R5C. I have a Canon R, the original Canon R. That's only 8-bit color. It does an extreme crop whenever you go into 4K. And it still produces quite lovely images that I pair with my Red Epic Dragon all the time in edits. Now, granted, the Dragon is better. I'm just saying that I can get the original Canon R to work that well with a Red Epic Dragon. That's something, okay? The R5C is superior to the R in many ways. And it's the new 8K camera. Now, the R5, I did a video on that when it was about to come out, and I criticized it for the reason that everyone criticized it, which is that it overheats, so you can't really use the 8K. And I'm not that crazy interested about 8K. However, if it's available in the camera, that does sound fun. I'm into that. But the new R5C, they've resolved that issue. They put in fans into it. Everyone's saying they've had no issues with overheating. They can record for long periods of time in 8K. It goes up to 60 frames per second in 8K, which is crazy. You need additional power, however, to have full functionality of the lenses in those modes, I believe, while you're filming in RAW at 8K like that. That's something to consider. However, all in all, the capability of the camera out of the box is still quite amazing, especially in such a small form factor that you could get away with some sniper shooting inside of, places that you're not necessarily supposed to be operating a video camera in. It still looks exactly like a stills camera, of which it is this insanely amazing stills camera as well, but it's just got that extra little bump to it that gives it those fans inside, so hopefully that wouldn't give you away. I've heard what they sound like a little bit. I don't think somebody would hear that in a loud setting if you were filming in some museum or something like that. Anyway, I'm not suggesting you do such things. I'm just saying you can get away with filming in areas with a camera like that you can't just bring a Red Epic Dragon into and then immediately get kicked out for filming. So that's nice. It does 4K in apparently full frame. It doesn't crop the sensor at that mode at the 120 frames per second. The 8K out of it, the raw 8K, of which it has 3 different flavors, like a light, a medium, and a high quality version, so depending on what your computer can handle, the footage looks great. I mean, it really does. I've got Sony, Canon, and Red, so I like all of them. Now, I have lately favored the Canon because it more easily pairs up with my Red than the Sony does, but I love the look that I can get out of the Sony. If you're in this market, at this price range, right now they're saying that the Canon R5C is going to be $4,500. Your other option is to go Sony, and that's going to be a little under $4,000. It's the FX3. You could get the A7S III, but if you are planning to use it for video, you might as well just get the FX3 because it's just a little bit more dialed in for video modes. And it's the same camera ultimately. It's just that it's a little bit more. It's got options that are more video user friendly, which is the whole gamut that I'm interested in. But it is limited to 4K. You do not have 8K. 8K is quite the future proofing, and as TVs are now 4K almost everywhere, it's hard to find an HD TV. You are losing some of the magic that 4K originally had, which was that you were getting a 4K camera for a 1080p end result TV, right? Like that's where it's going to air, or a 1080p screen. And you had all this cropping ability that was amazing. You've kind of lost that, right? Because if you're just getting a camera that is 4K capable, you are able to crop in, you can get away with a lot, but the reality is that you are going less than 4K at that point. So the image isn't as pristine as the 4K monitor is capable of presenting. So those are all things to just keep in mind. On the Red Epic Dragon, it's a 6K model, and 6K has been like plenty. I honestly don't feel like I need 8K. Like the 6K size of frame in comparison to a 4K is quite significant. I have a lot of cropping options. So at 8K, it's kind of insane. The limitations seem to be in battery consumption. It chews through the normal batteries that what are they, LP-E6 or whatever? Your normal Canon batteries, it just plows through those apparently, and then you're going to need additional battery power if you're trying to actually use 8K and have full functionality of your automatic lenses. Now, I have a lot of manual lenses. I've got a lot of Rokinon primes, so that's not a deal breaker for me. I could still keep that all in a very small, compact, ready to go out of the box camera setup. I don't have to bring on that additional power. But the idea that you could do that, and then you have that functionality too when you're filming something more serious and you want those automatic settings. The only time I'm really using automatic settings is if I'm handing the camera over to somebody to film something that doesn't know what they're doing. That is really nice. And I've been filming a show where I've been handing the camera over to a lot of people for temporary shots because I can't film it and I'm in it and I need auto settings. So that's important. I give them the EOS R for those moments because they can just tap and it focuses. That's when I would use it. Or if it's on a gimbal, I've done a lot of gimbal work. Most of my gimbal work has been done with manual lenses and no autofocus. And it is challenging. It's limiting. As a single person without somebody, operating the focus on that, I mean, it's limiting, It's really nice to be able to have an autofocus on there. And that was part of the reason I got the R back in the day, is I wanted finally a camera that could do some autofocus. And I was choosing between Sony and Canon then for that price tier. And I went with Canon just because I hadn't had a Canon for a while. And I love the color science of Canon. And Sony's gotten way better with their color science, especially with the new Venice profile that they've got, color profile that is available in things like the FX3 and the FX6, and unfortunately not available in the FX9, which came out first. And so it's like it doesn't have the Venice color science, which is definitely a hiccup for the FX9. I hope somehow they'd figure out how to put that in. Quite a tangent I'm going into here, but I'll close out with one last thing that has been noted about the R5C that's a little bit disappointing, and I hope that they change this. But for now, it only has C-Log 3, it doesn't have C-Log 2, and C-Log 2 really has the most dynamic range and the most flexibility as far as color grading goes. So that's a little odd. I hope that they change that. If you were going up to the next price point in the Canon lineup, it's the C70. The C70 is dedicated to be a filming camera. It's not that much bigger than the R5C. I guess I've never held either one of these, so I'm talking out my ass. I don't know. But I do know this, though. The C70 has been a very attractive camera to me for quite some time. I've kept my eye on it. It is limited to 4K, but it has built-in ND filters, which is super nice. The R5C does not have that. Neither does the Sony FX6. FX3, sorry. These names are ridiculous. Having built-in ND filters is huge, but I've really gotten used to not having that in the Red. My Red does not have built-in NDs. So I'm pretty familiar with that, but it is amazing to have them in camera like that. So that's a huge bonus. And then the other thing that the C70 has is the DGO sensor, which actually samples 2 images at one time, and it gives 2 exposure values to it, so you get this higher dynamic range out of the camera. So you have this one dedicated feed that's focused on cleaning up the noise in your shadows, and you got this other dedicated feed that's focused on not clipping in your highlights, and then it pairs those together, and then the end output is that you have a 16 plus stop dynamic range out of a Canon camera, which until they invented that, until they've kind of mimicked that technology. I guess that is a proprietary technology to them, but until they introduced the DGO technology, I don't think any single Canon camera has ever hit that kind of dynamic range before, so that's huge. Now you're getting into the territory of Red, which apparently, while we're at this price point, I'll just point out, the Red Komodo is in the same category as the C70 as far as price range, and the Red Komodo looks really nice, and there's so many things that I could go into talking about Red, but I'm not going to go into that at the moment. We'll do another video about that, but one thing that has been noted about the Komodo is that it has less dynamic range than its other Red partners. Like apparently, I think it's claimed at 16 stops, I believe, which is kind of where Red has been at, but it has tested closer to like 12.5 stops. So that is a little bit disappointing. So I think you can actually get more dynamic range out of the Canon C70 than you can out of the Red Komodo, and those are definitely paired in the same price point. Choosing between the Canon C70 and the Canon R5C, That's a hard call. There's $1,000 difference, and for $1,000 less, you get 8K, which is really nice. You get the RAW. They have recently introduced a new firmware update to the C70 that allows for RAW Lite, but that is, you've capped it out at that point because the Canon C70 records onto SD cards, and the Canon R5C actually can record onto CF Express cards. So those are more powerful. They can handle better data rates, which allows for its RAW capabilities. You'll never be able to achieve that on the Canon C70 because of its limitation with using SD cards. It's just never, even though they've gotten way faster, it's still not going to be to that point where it can handle these kind of data rates. There is one last thing that I do want to point out. You have to have a very nice computer to be able to handle editing this kind of footage. I mean, seriously, you really got to think about that. And you need to be editing off of SSDs. You can't be planning to be editing this kind of footage off of spinning hard disk drives. So that is a huge thing to factor in. However, if your computer's not up to snuff to handle the 8K RAW for some time as you build into that, you have other codec options. So you could go with 4K for a while. Just do whatever the camera's capable of, and as you expand the capability of your computer or your hard drives that you're editing off of, which would SSDs are what I've gone to in the last year instead of RAID systems is what I had been using. Most of my work is now edited on SSDs, and the performance is just amazing. It's fantastic, so I can't recommend that enough. But until you get to that point where your processor's fast enough, you can just record in lesser codecs, and then as you get the better computer, you'll be able to then use better features out of your camera so it can upgrade with you. If I was shopping for a camera in that price territory, I would pay the extra money to get it over the Sony FX3. I do think that overall the Canon, there was like a test that was put out where they did side-by-sides of the Canon R5 and the Sony, did they do the FX3 or the A7S3? It might have been the A7S3, which is still the same sensor as the FX3. And it was these side-by-sides, and all the popular vloggers were, trying to select which one was which and call it out, and there were 10 different shots and stuff. And in looking at it, I guessed 9 out of the 10 correctly that they looked very, very similar. 9 out of the 10 I guessed correctly that they're, which one was what. And I every time I preferred the Canon just a little bit more. Now, I don't know if that's just a little bit less compression, if that's what's going on, but there's something about it, the final look, that's just a little bit more dimensional. It's got a little bit more depth to it, a little bit more pop, and there's something about Canon, in my opinion, that, and I'm not saying you can't get the Sony to get there in your color grade, but it more easily and quickly makes people look a little bit better. People talk about Canon looking a bit soft. Yeah, but that's a good thing for people. And I know that sounds like a cop-out, but it's really not. The most important thing that you could do if you're filming people is that they look good. That's super important. So to be able to get that, it's got that slight magic and softness to the skin tones that is a little bit more challenging to achieve on Sony cameras. I think the Sony cameras are just a little bit harsher. So consistently, granted, I don't have the newest Sony camera, but I'm just saying on all the shots that I've seen, all the color grades, when I see a side-by-side, I consistently like the way people look. I think they look a little bit, prettier or more handsome in the Canon color science, and the way that it just softens the image just a little bit. Because I do find myself having to soften the images back up in post, and you can always choose to do that, but there is still a slightly different end result in doing that post versus what naturally happens out of the camera. Okay, now I'm actually going to stop talking about this stuff. So I don't know if you found any of that useful, but it's a rant, and it's a fun topic, and there's nobody around to talk to about it, so hey, there you go. All right, I'll catch you guys around on whatever next episode. Take care, guys. Bye.
Movie Voice.